He thought the badge made him untouchable. He didn't realize the woman in front of him had come to measure how far power could fall. Rain slid down the glass towers of downtown Richmond, turning the city lights into long silver streaks across the pavement. It was just after 8 p.m., the hour when office workers hurried to parking garages and restaurants filled with tired voices. People moved fast, heads down, umbrellas tilted against the weather, trying to outrun another ordinary night. Then the sound of a police siren cut through the street like a blade. The crowd slowed. Some turned. Others lifted their phones before they even knew why. Officer Ryan Walker stepped from his cruiser with the kind of confidence that came from years of never being questioned. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform pressed sharp, jaw set like stone, he carried himself as if the sidewalk belonged to him. His badge gleamed beneath the street lamp. His expression said something louder than metal ever could. He spotted the woman standing beneath a bus shelter and walked straight toward her. Danielle Brooks held a plain black umbrella in one hand and a leather tote in the other. Mid-30s, calm eyes, navy coat buttoned high against the cold. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. She looked like someone ending a long day and trying to get home. But Ryan had already decided what she was before he reached her. "You," he barked, pointing toward the curb. "Step out here." Conversations nearby died mid-sentence. Danielle turned slowly, not startled, not angry, simply attentive. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was even, warm, almost patient. Ryan gave a short laugh. "We'll decide that." ID. She studied him for a second, then reached into her coat and handed over a wallet-sized card case. He barely glanced at it. "Figures," he muttered. Always got an attitude when someone asks a simple question. A man under the awning shifted uncomfortably. A woman beside him whispered, "This doesn't look right." Ryan ignored them. He stepped closer, invading Danielle's space, his tone louder now for the benefit of the gathering audience. "What are you doing in this district tonight?" Danielle blinked once. "Walking to my car." "Funny," Ryan said. "Because people usually have a reason for being here." A few uneasy stares moved between them. Danielle did not move. Rain tapped softly on her umbrella. "Officer, are you detaining me?" The question seemed to irritate him more than any insult could have. "I'm asking the questions." He motioned toward the wet sidewalk. "Set your bag down." Danielle lowered the tote carefully. Her face remained unreadable. No shaking hands. No raised voice. No panic. That stillness made Ryan sharper, louder, more certain he needed to win whatever this had become. He circled once, glancing at the crowd filming from a distance. "See, this is the problem now," he announced. "People think rules don't apply to them." Danielle looked past him at the phones being raised around the block. Then she asked a strange question. "Are all the cameras rolling?" Ryan frowned. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she replied softly. "Just making sure everyone can see clearly." Something in the street changed then. It was subtle, almost invisible. The crowd that had expected embarrassment now sensed something else. Ryan felt it too, though he couldn't name it. He thrust a hand toward her tote. "Open it." Danielle set the umbrella aside, knelt gracefully, and unzipped the bag. Inside were folders, a tablet, and a slim silver recorder with a red light blinking steadily. Ryan's smirk faltered for the first time. Danielle lifted her eyes to his and offered the smallest hint of a smile. In the distance, headlights turned the corner, 3 black SUVs moving slowly through the rain. The 3 black SUVs stopped in perfect alignment along the curb, their headlights cutting bright lanes through the rain. Doors opened almost at once. Men and women in dark coats stepped out with the calm precision of people who did not need to raise their voices to control a scene. The crowd that had been whispering only seconds earlier fell into complete silence. Officer Ryan Walker straightened instinctively, one hand moving toward his belt, the other still gripping Danielle Brooks's identification case. he tried to recover the swagger that had begun slipping from him. "This is an active." "Stop," he called out. "Step back unless you are authorized." No one answered him directly. Instead, a tall woman with silver streaks in her hair walked forward beneath a navy umbrella. Her posture was military sharp, her eyes unreadable. "Captain Laura Bennett, Internal Affairs Division." The words were stitched in small lettering on the badge clipped inside her coat. She looked first at Danielle, then at Ryan, then at the blinking recorder resting inside the open tote bag. "Good evening, Officer Walker," she said. Her voice was soft enough that people leaned in to hear it. "Please remove your hands from Ms. Brooks's property." Ryan forced a laugh. "Captain, with respect, I am conducting lawful police business." Laura extended her hand. "Then you will have no issue returning what does not belong to you." Rainwater rolled down Ryan's temple. He handed over the case a little too quickly. Danielle accepted it without comment and slid it back into her coat. She did not gloat. She did not smirk. She simply stood there as if this moment had arrived exactly on schedule. Ryan glanced at the agents behind Laura and tried a different tone. "What is this supposed to be?" Laura stepped aside. "This is Phase 3. Confusion crossed several faces in the crowd. Phones rose higher. Ryan frowned. "I do not know what game this is, but you are interfering with police procedure." Danielle finally spoke. "No, Officer Walker. We are documenting it." She reached into the tote and removed a thin folder sealed in clear plastic. Inside were printed photographs, transcripts, dates, body camera logs, complaint summaries, and screenshots from city surveillance feeds. Ryan recognized his own face on more than one page. The color drained from his expression. "You have been under review for 8 months, Danielle continued. Pattern stops. Selective enforcement. Intimidation. Repeated citizen complaints that disappeared before formal processing." Ryan shook his head too fast. "That is nonsense. Anybody can file a complaint." "True," Danielle said. "But not everybody can erase them from the system. Someone helped you." The street seemed colder now. People who had once watched Danielle with uncertainty now watched Ryan with open disbelief. A delivery driver near the bus stop muttered, "I knew something was off with this guy." Ryan heard it. He heard all of it. "You cannot do this out here," he snapped. "This is harassment." Laura Bennett took one measured step closer. "No, Officer Walker. Harassment is what happened before we arrived." She nodded toward the crowd. "Fortunately, there are witnesses." Ryan looked around and saw no friendly faces. Even the people who might have defended a uniform moments earlier were staring at him as if they had just seen the costume fall away. Danielle held up the silver recorder. The red light still blinked. "For the record," she said calmly, "you initiated contact without cause, ignored identification, escalated publicly, and attempted a search without legal basis." Ryan swallowed hard. "You set me up." Danielle's eyes never left his. "No. We gave you a choice. You made it on camera." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the city. Laura Bennett reached into her coat and removed a folded document stamped with the seal of the department. She opened it slowly while Ryan stared at it like a man watching a bridge collapse one beam at a time. Captain Laura Bennett held the document at chest level while rain whispered against umbrellas and coat sleeves. Officer Ryan Walker stared at the city seal printed across the top page as if refusing to read it could somehow change what it said. Laura let the silence stretch long enough for every camera in the crowd to capture his face. Then she spoke with the same calm tone she had used from the moment she arrived. "Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative suspension pending formal investigation into misconduct, evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and retaliation against civilian complaints." Each word landed heavier than the last. Ryan blinked hard. "That is impossible." Laura did not react. "Your access credentials have already been disabled." Ryan reached for the radio on his shoulder out of habit. Static answered him. He grabbed for the phone in his pocket and unlocked it with shaking fingers. No service to department systems. No dispatch login. No patrol dashboard. The tools that had once obeyed him without question were suddenly silent. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Danielle Brooks stood a few feet away, rain gathering on the shoulders of her coat, watching him with the same steady expression she had worn all night. No anger. No triumph. Just patience. Ryan pointed at her, searching for something to hold onto. You lied about who you were. Danielle tilted her head slightly. You never asked. A few people in the crowd laughed under their breath. Ryan heard that too. The sound cut deeper than shouting ever could. This is political, he snapped. This is a setup because I do my job. Laura folded the suspension notice and handed it to one of the investigators beside her. Your job was never the problem, Officer Walker. Your choices were. Another agent stepped forward carrying a sealed evidence pouch. Inside were department complaint forms, some marked closed without signatures, others missing required case numbers. Ryan's eyes widened before he could stop them. Danielle noticed. She noticed everything. We traced multiple records to your login history, she said. Reports removed after citizens named you directly. Traffic footage deleted within 48 hours. Body camera gaps that happened only when complaints followed. Ryan shook his head. You cannot prove I did any of that. Danielle's voice remained level. That recorder in my bag captured tonight. The servers captured the rest. For the first time, fear replaced anger in his face. He looked toward the cruiser parked at the curb, then toward the street beyond the crowd, calculating distance, options, excuses. There were none left. A middle-aged man near the bus stop lowered his phone and said quietly, "My nephew filed one of those complaints last year." Another voice answered from somewhere behind him. Mine too. The crowd was no longer watching a confrontation. They were recognizing a pattern. Ryan turned to Laura. You are doing this in public on purpose. No, she said. You did your part in public. We are simply finishing it there. The rain began to ease, falling now in thinner drops that glimmered under the streetlights. Danielle stepped closer, stopping just beyond arm's reach. Do you remember a woman named Teresa Hall? Ryan frowned, confused. Should I? She was 62. You stopped her outside a pharmacy. You searched her groceries and left her medicine in the gutter. Ryan said nothing. Danielle continued. She was my aunt. The street seemed to freeze around them. So that is what this is, Ryan muttered. Revenge. Danielle's eyes hardened for the first time. If it were revenge, I would have come alone. She glanced at the investigators, the witnesses, the cameras, the sealed files. This is accountability. Laura nodded to two officers from Internal Affairs. Collect his badge, service keys, and vehicle access card. Ryan instinctively touched the badge on his chest, the symbol he had trusted more than character, more than truth. His hand lingered there for one last second before he slowly unclipped it. The metal looked smaller in his palm than it ever had on his uniform. The badge rested in Ryan Walker's palm like a piece of metal stripped of meaning. Just minutes earlier it had seemed larger than the street, larger than the people around him, larger than consequence itself. Now it was only an object reflecting cold light from the wet pavement. One of the Internal Affairs officers stepped forward with an evidence envelope. Ryan hesitated before dropping the badge inside. The click of the seal closing sounded louder than the sirens that had brought him there. Nobody in the crowd missed it. Phones remained raised. Faces remained fixed. But something had changed in those faces. Curiosity had become recognition. Recognition had become memory. A woman near the curb stepped forward first, clutching a grocery bag against her coat. He stopped my son last spring, she said, voice shaking but clear. Said he matched a description. Kept him on the sidewalk 40 minutes while neighbors watched. Another man lifted his hand. He searched my truck outside the hardware store and laughed when he found nothing. Then another voice. Then another. Stories that had lived in kitchens, car rides, and whispered family conversations began spilling into the rain. Danielle Brooks listened without interrupting. She knew this moment mattered more than any paperwork. Truth did not always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrived when strangers realized they were not alone. Ryan looked from face to face, searching for weakness, for hesitation, for someone to defend him out of habit. There was none. These people are piling on, he snapped. You are letting a mob run this. Captain Laura Bennett did not blink. No, Officer Walker. We are hearing witnesses. Ryan's jaw tightened. Witnesses to what? Hurt feelings. The words landed badly. Even he seemed to know it. A young man near the bus shelter lowered his hood and stepped into the open. He could not have been older than 22. Witnesses to being treated like suspects for breathing, he said. Witnesses to being told our neighborhoods are problems and our skin is probable cause. Silence followed him, the kind of silence that forms when someone says aloud what many have carried privately for years. Ryan looked away first. Danielle took one slow step forward. This is the part you never counted on, she said. Records matter. Video matters. But people matter most. Laura motioned to another investigator, who opened a hard case and removed a tablet. She turned the screen toward Ryan. Body camera clips. Traffic stop logs. Dispatch timestamps. Civilian complaint summaries aligned by date and location. Patterns no longer hidden inside separate files. You thought each incident disappeared because each person went home alone, Danielle said. You never imagined they would stand together. Rainwater dripped from the awning in a steady rhythm. Somewhere farther down the block, traffic resumed, but this corner of Richmond felt paused between two eras. Ryan swallowed and tried one last shield. I followed procedure. Laura answered immediately. Procedure does not begin with contempt. She handed the tablet to an officer beside her. And it does not end with erased records. A city bus rolled up to the stop, doors hissing open, then closed again when passengers saw the crowd and chose to wait for the next one. No one wanted to miss what came next. Danielle reached into her tote and removed a second folder, thicker than the first. This goes to the review board tomorrow morning, she said. And to the district attorney by noon. Ryan stared at the folder as if it were heavier than stone. You planned all this? Danielle's expression stayed calm. No. You built it. We just organized it. The crowd murmured again, but this time there was no fear in the sound. There was relief. Ryan's shoulders, once squared with practiced authority, seemed to sink inch by inch. Laura Bennett checked her watch. Vehicle inventory team will arrive in 3 minutes, she said. After that, we need keys, locker access, and a full statement. Ryan glanced at the dark police cruiser parked behind him, rain sliding across its windshield. For years it had been his moving office, his shield, his stage. Tonight it looked like a car waiting for someone else. The patrol cruiser sat under the streetlight like a monument that had suddenly lost its name. Rain traced slow lines down the windshield while 2 inventory officers approached with clipboards and sealed containers. Ryan Walker held the ring of keys in his hand so tightly that the edges pressed white marks into his palm. He looked at the vehicle, then at the crowd, then at Captain Laura Bennett as if waiting for someone to wake him from a bad dream. No one moved to rescue him. Keys, Officer Walker, Laura said. Her tone was not harsh. It did not need to be. Ryan let out a breath through clenched teeth and tossed the ring toward her. One of the officers caught it cleanly and stepped past him without comment. The simple act carried more humiliation than shouting ever could. Danielle Brooks watched the cruiser door open, watched the center console photographed, watched the trunk inventoried beneath the glow of portable lights. She had spent months reading reports that ended with missing footage, absent notes, unexplained gaps. Tonight every item would be logged in full view of the same public that had so often been told to trust what they could not see. "This is theatre," Ryan muttered. "You are making a show." Danielle answered quietly. "No. Secrecy was the show. This is documentation." A few people in the crowd nodded. Others kept filming. The young man from earlier folded his arms and said to no one in particular, "Funny how accountability always feels dramatic to people who never had any." Ryan turned sharply. "You do not know me." The young man met his stare. "That was the problem. We knew you too well." Laura Bennett signaled to another investigator, who carried over a tablet and a printed chain of custody form. "Officer Walker, state whether any department property is inside your locker beyond standard issue equipment." Ryan laughed once, but there was no confidence left in it. "You think I am stupid enough to answer questions on a sidewalk?" "I think," Laura replied, "you have spent years assuming questions were for other people." The crowd went still again. Every sentence now seemed to peel another layer off the image Ryan had built around himself. He glanced toward Danielle, trying one more angle. "Your aunt filed a complaint, did she not? This whole thing started because you took it personally." Danielle's eyes stayed steady. "It started because she was not the only one." She reached into her tote and removed a stack of handwritten letters bound with a rubber band. Different paper. Different pens. Different handwriting styles. These came after we opened a confidential line. Mothers. Students. Veterans. Business owners. People who stopped reporting because they believed no one listened. She held the letters only a moment before placing them back in the bag. "I listened." The words hung in the damp air heavier than thunder. One of the inventory officers stepped from the cruiser carrying a small evidence pouch. Laura glanced inside and passed it to another agent without expression. Ryan noticed the motion instantly. "What is that?" "Items not listed on department inventory," Laura said. "We will discuss them downtown." Ryan's face tightened. For the first time he looked less angry than tired. The kind of tired that arrives when denial has nowhere left to sit. Traffic lights changed at the intersection. Red to green. Green to yellow. The city kept moving while one man's certainty came apart in public. Danielle stepped closer, close enough that only Ryan and Laura clearly heard her next words. "Do you know why we waited tonight?" Ryan said nothing. "Because you were offered retraining last month. Counseling 6 months before that. Written warnings before that. Every chance to change came quietly." She let the pause settle. "You chose public behavior, so public truth answered." Ryan looked down at the wet pavement. Laura checked another form and nodded to the officers. "Vehicle cleared. Next step is headquarters." She extended her hand. "Phone, access cards, and any secondary keys." Ryan slowly removed his wallet, his phone, and a second key card hidden behind an old family photo. Even now, habits of concealment surfaced automatically. Laura accepted the items and placed them into evidence envelopes one by one. Around them, the crowd no longer looked angry. They looked lighter, as if something invisible had finally been named and therefore weakened. The rain had almost stopped by the time the convoy prepared to leave. Water still dripped from awnings and tree branches, but the storm that mattered had already passed through. Officer Ryan Walker stood on the sidewalk without his badge, without his radio, without the posture that had once announced him from half a block away. Under the streetlights he looked less like authority and more like a man who had misplaced the story he told about himself. Captain Laura Bennett gestured toward the rear SUV. "You will ride with us to headquarters." Ryan gave a bitter smile. "So now I am the suspect." Laura met his eyes. "Now you are accountable." The word settled heavily over the crowd. No cheers followed. No one celebrated. What stood there instead was something quieter and stronger than celebration. Relief. The kind that comes when a locked door finally opens. Ryan glanced at Danielle Brooks one last time before moving. You waited months for this moment. Danielle adjusted the strap of her tote and answered without emotion. No. I worked months so this moment would not be denied. He shook his head as if still searching for a loophole hidden somewhere in language. You could have come to me privately. Danielle's expression sharpened just slightly. Many people did. Ryan had. No answer. He stepped toward the SUV, then stopped when an elderly woman near the curb called out, "My grandson still checks over his shoulder because of you." The crowd parted for her. She was small, wrapped in a tan coat, grocery bag hanging from one wrist. Her voice was not loud, but it carried cleanly through the night. You made children nervous around uniforms. Do you understand that? Ryan looked down and said nothing. The woman nodded once, as if silence itself confirmed what words could not. She turned away before anyone could help her. Danielle watched her go with eyes that held both pride and sadness. She knew those wounds did not disappear because one man lost power. But naming harm was where healing often began. Laura opened the SUV door. We are leaving now. Ryan climbed inside without another protest. The door closed with a muted thud. The tinted window reflected the crowd back at itself, then hid him completely. Engine started. Headlights swept across wet pavement. One by one, the vehicles pulled away from the curb and disappeared into downtown traffic. For a few seconds no one moved. Then people began lowering their phones. Umbrellas folded. Strangers who had stood shoulder to shoulder through the confrontation now exchanged glances that felt strangely familiar. Some nodded to Danielle as they passed. Others simply touched a hand to their chest in thanks. A young father holding the hand of a little boy paused near her. The child stared at the street where the cruiser had stood. Are police supposed to help people? He asked. His father hesitated, embarrassed by the honesty only children can carry. Danielle crouched slightly so she could meet the boy's eyes. Yes, she said. That is exactly what they are supposed to do. The boy considered that, then nodded as if storing the answer for later. He and his father walked into the thinning crowd. Street noise slowly returned. Horns in the distance. A bus braking at the corner. Shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Richmond was becoming a city again instead of a stage. Laura Bennett reappeared from the sidewalk edge, having stayed behind after the convoy departed. She held out a sealed envelope. Preliminary commendation request, she said. And a transfer offer, if you want it. Danielle accepted neither immediately. She looked at the envelope, then at the people dispersing around them. Maybe later, she said. Laura smiled faintly. You always say that. Danielle glanced toward the dark place where Ryan's cruiser had been parked. There is still work here. Laura nodded once and walked away. Danielle stood alone beneath the clearing sky. Clouds were breaking apart above the towers, revealing narrow strips of moonlight. She opened her tote, checked that the letters were dry, and closed it again. Then she started down the sidewalk at an ordinary pace, just another woman heading home through the city. But behind her, something invisible had shifted. Fear had lost ground. And sometimes that is how justice first arrives, not with noise, but with room to breathe. By sunrise the story had moved faster than traffic. Clips from the sidewalk were everywhere. Local stations replayed the moment Ryan Walker handed over his badge. National commentators debated procedure, culture, and accountability. Community pages posted old stories in fresh detail. What had happened on one rain-soaked block the night before was now unfolding across screens, breakfast tables, office break rooms, and city hall corridors. Danielle Brooks woke before 6, as she always did, in her small brick townhouse on the north side of Richmond. She brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and let the pale morning light spill across a kitchen lined with organized folders and neatly stacked books. Her phone vibrated non-stop on the counter. Missed calls. Interview requests. Messages from activists. Messages from strangers. Messages from people who had once stayed silent and now wanted to speak. She turned the phone face down and took a slow sip of coffee before touching any of it. Noise could wait. Truth had already done its work. At 8:30 she walked into headquarters through a side entrance reserved for investigators. No cameras there. No shouting reporters. Just fluorescent lights, security glass, and the low hum of printers. Captain Laura Bennett met her near the elevator holding 2 folders. And looking more tired than the night before. "You are trending in 12 states, Laura said dryly. Danielle did not smile. "That sounds exhausting." "It is for the people managing it." They stepped into the elevator together. On the 5th floor, conference room doors stood open and staff moved quickly with stacks of files. Cases that had sat untouched for months were suddenly urgent. Complaints once labeled inconclusive were being reopened. Supervisors who had once avoided signatures now wanted meetings. Accountability had a way of improving calendars. Laura placed the folders on the conference table. One contains requests for you to speak publicly. The other contains statements from officers who suddenly remember things. Danielle glanced at the thicker folder and raised an eyebrow. Amazing what memory can do overnight. Laura leaned against the table. Ryan talked. Danielle looked up. About himself. About others too. Laura's expression hardened. He says records were altered above his level. Says he was protected because arrest numbers looked good in budget hearings. Danielle exhaled slowly. She had suspected a shield around him. Systems rarely grow one bad actor by accident. Then last night was not an ending, she said. It was an introduction. Laura nodded. Exactly. A knock sounded at the open door. The elderly woman from the sidewalk stepped in carefully, wearing the same tan coat, clutching a handbag with both hands. Danielle recognized her immediately. Ms. Evelyn Carter, Laura said. She asked to speak with you. Danielle moved a chair out for her. Evelyn sat, then opened her bag and removed a folded photograph. In it stood a teenage boy in graduation robes, smiling beside a proud family. My grandson, she said. He stopped applying to jobs downtown after what happened with that officer. Said every interview felt like another stop. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I came to tell you he submitted 3 applications this morning. Danielle looked at the photograph for a long moment. Some victories never appear in headlines. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her hand once. No. The older woman replied. Thank you for staying. After she left, the room fell quiet again. Laura handed Danielle a final envelope, the one from the night before. Open it now. Inside was a formal appointment letter naming Danielle Brooks as interim director of the Civil Rights Oversight Task Force for the city. Temporary authority. Immediate powers. Access to every pending file. Danielle read it twice, then set it down carefully. They should have done this months ago. Laura gave a tired half-smile. They thought no one was watching. Outside the conference room windows, morning sunlight struck the towers of downtown Richmond and turned them bright as polished steel. Danielle gathered the folders, the letter, and the old photograph Evelyn had forgotten on the table. Then she headed for the archive room where locked cabinets waited to be opened. The archive room smelled like dust, paper, and years of delayed truth. Metal cabinets lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each drawer labeled in careful black print that suggested order while hiding neglect. Danielle Brooks stood at the center table with sleeves rolled neatly to her wrists, a pair of reading glasses in one hand, and the interim appointment letter tucked inside her folder. Morning had become afternoon without anyone noticing. Files were stacked in columns around her like unfinished conversations. Captain Laura Bennett entered carrying 2 banker's boxes and set them down with a grunt. These came from record storage in the basement, she said. They were marked duplicate materials scheduled for disposal. Danielle looked at the faded labels. Citizen complaints. Internal review. Closed without action. She gave Laura a long glance. Scheduled by whom? Laura's expression was flat. That is one of today's many questions. They opened the first box together. Inside were forms never entered into the digital system, witness statements unsigned by supervisors, photographs clipped to incident reports, and letters mailed by residents who had never received replies. Some pages were 5 years old. Some were only months old. All of them had one thing in common. Someone had decided they were safer unseen. Danielle turned pages carefully, stopping whenever she recognized a familiar name from the hotline calls. They did not lose trust overnight, she said quietly. It was stolen one file at a time. Laura nodded and slid another folder across the table. There is more. This one held emails. Not dramatic confessions. Nothing that simple. Calendar moves. Meeting notes. Suggestions to delay review until after budget season. Requests to avoid negative press. Language polished enough to sound professional and hollow enough to hide responsibility. Danielle read each page slowly. Systems rarely confessed in obvious words. They confessed through habits. At 3:00 a knock came at the open door. A young analyst stepped in carrying a laptop and looking both nervous and eager. "Ma'am, the public portal went live an hour ago." Danielle removed her glasses. Response? He turned the screen so they could see. Hundreds of submissions already. Names, dates, badge numbers, locations, uploaded photos, written statements. Citizens who had spent years believing nobody listened were suddenly speaking all at once. The server crashed twice, he added. We expanded capacity. Danielle almost smiled. Good problem. The analyst hesitated. There is something else. Former Officer Walker requested counsel and offered supplemental testimony. Laura crossed her arms. Meaning he wants a deal. Meaning, Danielle said, he finally understands silence has a price. After the analyst left, she walked to the narrow window at the end of the room. From there she could see part of downtown Richmond, traffic threading through bright streets, pedestrians moving with ordinary urgency. Somewhere below, people were eating lunch, arguing over parking, planning weekends, living lives untouched by policy language and sealed drawers. Yet those drawers had shaped countless mornings and nights. She understood then why paperwork mattered so much. Harm often wore a stamp before it wore a face. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered. A young male voice spoke carefully. Ms. Brooks? This is Marcus Carter. Evelyn is my grandmother. Danielle recognized the name from the photograph. How is she? Proud, he said, then laughed softly. She told everyone at church you fixed the city before noon. Danielle smiled this time. I am still working on it. He grew serious. I wanted to tell you I got an interview tomorrow. Downtown accounting firm. She looked out at the towers catching late sunlight. Then go in knowing you belong there. There was a pause on the line, the kind made when encouragement lands somewhere deep. Thank you, he said. When the call ended, Laura was watching her from across the room. That right there, Laura said, tapping the mountain of files, is why this matters more than headlines. Danielle returned to the table and opened another drawer. Inside were fresh folders delivered just minutes earlier, names she recognized from command staff. She exhaled slowly. Then let us keep going. Outside, the city moved under clear skies. Inside, cabinet by cabinet, hidden weight was finally being lifted. 3 weeks later, the hearing room on the 4th floor was full before the doors officially opened. Reporters lined the back wall with notepads ready. Community leaders sat beside retired officers. Students from the local university filled the side rows. People who had never attended a city hearing before now stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to witness something they once believed only happened in movies, consequences with names attached. Danielle Brooks sat at the center table beneath the city seal, files arranged in clean stacks, a glass of water untouched beside her. She wore a charcoal suit, simple pearl earrings, and the same calm expression she had carried on the sidewalk that rainy night. Across the room, former officer Ryan Walker entered with legal counsel and took his assigned seat. Without the uniform, he seemed smaller somehow, as if authority had been adding inches no tailor could measure. He kept his eyes low while cameras clicked softly. Captain Laura Bennett sat behind Danielle with investigators from the task force, their tables crowded with binders, digital displays, and certified records. At 10 o'clock sharp, the board chair struck the gavel once. "This session is now in order." No one whispered after that. Danielle rose first. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. She simply walked the room through timelines, complaint numbers, erased entries, supervisory delays, disciplinary warnings ignored, and policy loopholes used like shields. Screens lit up behind her with charts and dates. Patterns once dismissed as isolated now stood visible in plain sequence. She named no citizens without consent. She protected every witness who had trusted the process enough to come forward. Then she paused and looked toward the board. "The issue before you is larger than one former officer," she said. A system taught people that if harm was repeated often enough, it would begin to look normal. The room stayed silent except for pens moving quickly across paper. Ryan's attorney objected twice and was overruled twice. Then Ryan was invited to speak. He stood slowly, cleared his throat, and looked toward the board instead of the crowd. "I made mistakes," he began. The phrase sounded practiced, polished by legal advice. "But I was under pressure. Numbers mattered. Response times mattered. We were told to be proactive." Danielle did not interrupt. Ryan continued, voice tightening. "I was not the only one." That sentence carried more truth than everything before it. The board members exchanged glances. Laura Bennett wrote something in the margin of her notes. Ryan looked toward Danielle then, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps expecting triumph. He found neither. She only watched him with the patience of someone who had long ago stopped needing revenge. When public comment opened, Evelyn Carter approached the microphone first. The room recognized her from interviews, though she had never sought them. She unfolded a handwritten note with trembling fingers. "My grandson starts work Monday," she said. For 2 years he believed this city had no place for him. Today he believes different. She lowered the paper. That is what fairness can repair. People in the audience wiped tears they pretended were not there. Next came a retired sergeant who admitted he had stayed silent too long. Then a college student who said she now wanted to study law. Then a business owner who offered internships to applicants from neighborhoods once over-policed and overlooked. The hearing had begun about misconduct. It had become something else entirely. By late afternoon the board returned with its decision. Permanent termination was affirmed. Pension review initiated. Supervisory audits expanded. An independent citizen review panel approved unanimously. The room released a breath it had been holding for years. Reporters rushed for exits to file headlines. Ryan remained seated, staring at the tabletop as people moved around him like water around stone. Danielle gathered her folders one by one. As she passed him, he finally spoke in a low voice. "Was it worth all this?" She stopped but did not turn immediately. Then she faced him and answered with gentle certainty. "Ask the people who can breathe easier now." She walked toward the doors where evening sunlight poured through the glass in long golden lines. Outside, the city sounded ordinary again. Cars moved. Shoes crossed sidewalks. A bus sighed at the curb. But ordinary felt different when fear no longer had the best seat in the room. And somewhere behind her, a badgeless silence learned what power never understands until too late. Being watched is not the same as being seen.